last few weeks at Catholic Charities, really dealing with the Afghan refugee crisis. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that, I think, tonight, mostly because it's kind of top of mind. But hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit into some of the broader complex issues that Diane did such a great job introducing tonight. So my name is Jay Brown. I'm the CEO of Commonwealth Catholic Charities. I've been in the Diocese of Richmond for, at dinner, they reminded me, 12 years now. When I came here 12 years ago, believe it or not, I had a full head of hair. And most days, I was a little bit more energetic than I am now. But here we are. I'm privileged to lead an organization that serves all across the Catholic Diocese of Richmond on behalf of the Catholic community. So we're very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and hopefully we can at least, start to delve into the very complex issue that is immigration. So first, I wanted to tell you a couple of things about Catholic Charities, if that was okay. That's my job, so they would have been mad at me if I didn't take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about us. So Commonwealth Catholic Charities, our mission is to provide quality and compassionate human services to all people, especially the most vulnerable, regardless of faith. So we serve, as I mentioned, on behalf of the Catholic community in the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. We serve people, and I'm sure everyone has heard this kind of phrase, we serve people because we are Catholic, not because they are Catholic. And I think so much of the work that we do with refugees and migrants coming to us from all across the world, whether it's in our Refugee Resettlement program or in any of our unaccompanied minors programs or our unaccompanied refugee minor programs, we see people from a wide array of faiths and backgrounds and cultures. And we are just so blessed, I think, as the arm of the Catholic Diocese of Richmond that provides that welcoming, that hospitality, and really helps people integrate into our communities and help our communities grow and thrive. So a little bit more about us. We do have a number of services. One of the hardest things, I think, a lot of times is to tell people what is Catholic Charities. We have 200 staff at 11 locations all across the Catholic Diocese. We're organized into 30 ministries, depending on how you count. The other day I counted 33, so it's kind of depends on the audience that we're talking to. If it's a Catholic audience, I guess 33 is a better number, right? But we do have one mission, and that mission is to serve the most vulnerable, and to do that very, very well to the highest level of quality possible, and to do that on your behalf. Oh, so this is my favorite slide in the world. It's fun facts about us. I like to talk about us. We're great. So we were founded in 1923. We are historically, and we remain primarily a child welfare agency. You see up there listed a number of different programs. We have several different foster care programs. We, of course, are an adoption agency. One of the unique things about Catholic Charities is that there are many private international adoption agencies in Virginia, but we are historically the only international foster care agency. So we provide foster care for kids coming from all over the world as refugees and as unaccompanied minors. We do a lot of work in far southwest Virginia. We are the only provider of infant placement adoption in far southwest Virginia, the counties of Lee, Norton, Wise, and Scott counties. And we're also a part of the global Catholic response to the HIV/AIDS pandemic across the globe. And finally, and probably most applicable for tonight, through our ministries to unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied refugee minors, refugees, and immigrants, we are one of the largest immigrant-serving organizations in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the next time you're at a cocktail party, you can say, "Did you know Commonwealth Catholic Charities is?" We thought that it would be helpful before we get into some of the meat of tonight, and I think there's a handout floating around that covers some of this for you as well. We wanted to talk, just get some level set on terms, and you're going to hear these repeated throughout the night, especially as we start to talk about the situation of the Afghan evacuees. So just to level set, get everybody on the same page, what is a migrant or an immigrant? A migrant is merely someone who moves from one place to another in order to improve their lives. I think many of us, historically, in our family history, certainly have immigrant roots, but I myself am a migrant. I was born and raised in southern Maine, and I migrated to the suburbs of Philadelphia to obtain an education at the finest institution of Catholic higher education in the United States of America, Villanova University. Send your kids there. And then I migrated again to Washington, D.C., and then migrated subsequently to Richmond, Virginia. So I think, are any of us native to Virginia Beach? I'm sure there's some of us who are. How about that? So the tricky question there are situations that we didn't have the unhappy accident or the happy accident of crossing a national border, just merely state ones or local ones. One of the major themes of Catholic teaching when it comes to migration, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is really the right for all people to provide for themselves and their families, and to move, if necessary, to find a better life. And we've all, I think, in our own histories, experienced that ourselves. So that is a migrant. All refugees are migrants. Not all migrants are refugees, right? And I think as we kind of get into these subtopics, and we could go much deeper than these four, and we may get into some of them in the Q&A, but for now, we thought that this would at least tee up the conversation tonight. So what is a refugee? A refugee is a person fleeing armed conflicts or persecution. Someone becomes a refugee only after a legal process that grants them refugee status. So to be a refugee, that is a legal status that confers legal permanent residency. Here in the United States, it also guarantees you the right to work or guarantees you the ability to work. So a refugee is a very specific status that is conferred upon an individual who is fleeing war and persecution. Kristen will talk a little bit more about the ins and outs about how that works. An asylee is a person who claims essentially to be a refugee, but whose claim has not yet been evaluated. So these are people who are crossing borders without prior authorization and claiming that they have a reason to fear for their lives, for their personal safety, for themselves and their families, and so they are fleeing their home country, coming into another country and asking for asylum. There are legal processes that govern the asylum process, and typically here in the United States, a claim of asylum is adjudicated over a period of 2 years. So there's an entire process that an individual goes through to receive asylum. During the time that that claim is being adjudicated, a person is present in the country, but does not necessarily have the legal authorization to work, certainly doesn't have any of the rights that come with refugee status. So there's a little bit of a difference until someone is granted asylum. And finally, this is a new category that I just learned about in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll be quite honest, Kristen was going to do this slide, so she was going to do it much better justice than I will, but she'll get into this a little bit more later. But so a parolee, and this is really where we get into some of the people who have been evacuated from Afghanistan, right? So we heard the term in the news, the special immigrant visa. Is that familiar? I'm hearing it was a legal status that was developed in the early 2000s or the mid-2000s that allowed people who assisted the United States military, coalition forces, or even some of our diplomatic attachés in Iraq or Afghanistan, allowed them to come to the United States if they were fleeing for their lives, and they're able to be assisted through the refugee resettlement process. Because of the urgent evacuation of people from Afghanistan, we were able to take a certain number of people who may have not been far enough along in the SIV process to have their visa in hand. And so those individuals were granted what's being called humanitarian parole. These folks have authorization to be in the United States for 2 years. They have to fulfill a laundry list of conditions, including getting, all, the school vaccinations, a COVID vaccine, and then they can apply for work authorization, but until that work authorization comes through, they're really kind of in this state of limbo, which is why we're so urgently trying to develop capacity across the diocese to provide compassionate assistance to these folks. So before we move on, any questions about those 4 broad categories? And I even threw in an extra one for you. You didn't pay for that one, so that was free, the SIV one, so congratulations, that's terrific. Any questions? We're good? Outstanding. I know we're going to have Q&A later. Okay, so how many people are familiar with Catholic social teaching? Everybody, outstanding. Are you familiar with this paradigm, See, Judge, Act? Is that familiar with folks? So this is something that I was so very excited to see kind of coming back into Catholic lexicon. Pope Francis has really been kind of bringing this paradigm back. I think that the See, Judge, Act, I first saw it written in a manual for the formation of clergy in Catholic social teaching. So really what we think of in Catholic social teaching so often is kind of these really long statements that are issued by popes and bishops. And certainly those are a corpus of Catholic teaching. But really what Catholic social teaching is, it's a process whereby the Christian community, right, us as the faithful, where we engage with real problems in society, right? And we take those real problems and we try to look at them through the lens of our faith. We try to ask ourselves, what does Scripture say about immigration? What does Scripture tell us about the death penalty? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to delve the depths of the tradition to say, what does the tradition have to say to the experience, the lived experience of the Christian community today here in Virginia Beach, 2021 on, what's today, September 21st? Outstanding. So it's this interplay of the lived experience of the Christian faithful and the tradition, the deep body, the deposit of faith, as we would call it, right, which are those documents from the bishops, Scripture, the tradition of the church. And it's that interplay that allows us to make judgments and then to act, right? So what our hope tonight is that what we would be able to do is to tell you a little bit about what the church teaches about immigration. And we're going to look at that primarily through the lens of a document that was written by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in collaboration with the bishops of Mexico in the early 2000s, where they tried to come together and really establish some themes that the church could utilize to evaluate immigration policy moving forward into the 2010s and certainly still today. So if you're familiar with the Justice for Immigrants campaign, I think that's the handout that you have. That campaign came out of this document that's called Strangers No Longer, Together on the Journey for Hope. So what we were asked to do tonight is talk a little bit about Catholic social teaching, and that's my part. And then Kristen's going to come up and tell you a little bit more about what we are doing as the Catholic Church in the Catholic Diocese of Richmond to respond to the real needs of our neighbors. And then hopefully we'll have some fun conversations about how y'all can help us, because that's the best part. Good? Agreed? Okay. And I typically tell people, especially I'm here late at night, you have to be very nice to me. I'm missing bath time to be here. My son is 19 months old. And so it's just extra special. You have to play my reindeer games. You have to ask me good questions, and we'll all have a good night. Okay. Those are the ground rules. Okay, so I told you that the first thing about Catholic teaching, Catholic social teaching, is the perception and the study of social problems, right? I think so often when we think about immigration, when we think about any social issue, we abstract it, right? So we hear stories on the news that are mediated from other perspectives, and we very seldom are able to hear from people who are really feeling the impact of the issues that we're here to study. So what we wanted to do tonight to start us off is we have a short video. It's about 2.5 minutes. This is a woman named Banafsha. She is a client of Commonwealth Catholic Charities. She came to the United States as one of those special immigrant visa holders. So she's going to talk a little bit about coming to the United States, leaving her home in Afghanistan, and we'll use that as kind of the backdrop to move forward and talk a little bit about Catholic teaching and immigration. Does that make sense? All right, thanks so much.
When I started coming to America, it was the peak of the coronavirus, and then my husband had to stay in my country. I came along with my son, and then I was thinking, oh my God, what should I do if my husband don't come? Every day, every minute. 6 months of my life was like a horror, but it was good that some people were there to understand me. You know, it was difficult, but it was good that peoples were there, like CCC. So I was happy that at least like these resettlement agencies are existed. Otherwise, how a person coming from an outside country coming into a new country, a new area with a new people, a new culture will adopt and how they could engage in the activities, in the social, and how they could do their routine daily work. If resettlement agency was not there, like CCC was not there, what I would do, I don't know really.
When a family or individual arrives and is resettled by CCC's team, we jump into action to make their transition as smooth and as simple as possible. That means finding housing, connecting their utilities, furnishing their homes, and stocking their pantries. It also means making those vital community connections to make sure people feel both welcome and at home. These families come with virtually nothing. So as a resettlement agency, we buy bedding, we buy towels, clothes, furniture, food, literally everything needed to set up a home. And then we get to the hard work of enrolling children in school, assisting moms and dads to find employment, provide English and cultural education classes, mentorship, and so much more.
Our bad situation that brought us here, but thanks God that there's a lot of people, good people here. There's a lot of support here. So I'm thankful for God, and then I'm thankful for those good people who existed, still existed for support of human being. They're not thinking that I'm an outsider. They're thinking that I'm able to do something for them. They're thinking about my abilities. They're thinking about my intelligence. And that is the proud that I'm feeling. And I'm living it. My goal here. My goal is not stopping here. I'm sure that I will go higher, higher, and then higher.
So that was Banafsha's story, and I go back to that beginning part of her story where she was talking about coming here and not knowing whether or not she was going to be reunified with her husband and her family. And I think about, we on staff, we're lucky right now, given what's happening in the United States, that we have a number of special immigrant visa holders who are on our staff, who are on our team. And we were hoping that we would be able to bring one tonight, but they're off doing the work, so we couldn't take them out of the field. So we apologize for that. But I was, talking to one of our team members who has family back in Afghanistan, and I can't imagine being in a position where my family, my parents, are back in Afghanistan, and we're watching the images that we watched on the television, and there's literally nothing that I could do to help. And just that feeling of helplessness and what that would be like. I just can't imagine. And so I think, just as a person, I often think that one of the things that would fix a lot of the problems that we see in the world is just returning to basic empathy, right? And I just think that trying to understand that situation of not knowing whether or not I'm ever going to be able to see my wife or my child or my mom or my dad is something that the people that we serve go through every single day. And trying to find ways that we can compassionately serve those folks in that situation is to me, the biggest challenge that we have, in addition to finding housing and raising money to pay the rent. But how do we really make sure that we're there and that we're present with people in those moments where there's that complete helplessness and inability to know what's going to happen tomorrow? Forgive me for that, so we can move on. Some facts. These aren't fun facts. These are facts about what I consider to be the worldwide crisis of displaced persons. There are more people displaced from their homes today than there have been ever in the history of the world. That's including after the Second World War. So worldwide today, there are 80 million people who have been forced out of their homes. That's roughly about 34,000 people or persons are displaced every single day due to war, violence, and persecution in their communities. The majority of migrants remain in their home country. That's my story, right? I migrated several times to find a better life for myself and ultimately for my family. I certainly wasn't displaced from my home due to war or persecution, but the overwhelming majority of people who are forced from their homes due to war or persecution remain in their home country. 24 million people worldwide have fled their home country and sought refuge or asylum in another country. So this is where we make the difference between a migrant and a refugee. Over 50% of those 24 million are under the age of 18, are children. Less than 1% of those who are granted refugee status, so that initial status is actually conferred by the United Nations Command on Refugees, is that correct? I learned something this week, it's terrific. Less than 1% of those who are granted refugee status are submitted for resettlement in a third country. The overwhelming majority of people ultimately return home. And traditionally, about 50% of the people who are granted refugee status and are referred for resettlement in another country are brought to the United States through the Refugee Resettlement Program. We could talk a lot about the Refugee Resettlement Program over the last couple of years. We have seen some very historic limitations on the number of arrivals into the U.S.'s Refugee Resettlement Program, and we certainly saw that here in the Diocese of Richmond. We're a part of a national network, again, that Kristen is going to talk about in a little while, but most Catholic Charities agencies around the country provide these services, and unfortunately, due to the limited number of arrivals that have come to the United States over the last 3 or 4 years, we saw a large attrition, and we saw many resettlement agencies, many of our colleagues actually had to close offices. We were lucky in that our board of directors and the Bishop of Richmond really said we want to maintain this ministry. This is a diocesan ministry that's been functioning for well over 40 years. It has made our communities better. It has made our diocese better. And so we have fulfilled that commitment, and we got through some pretty lean years, and that's put us in a tremendous position right now to be able to respond to the current Afghan crisis. But to get a little bit more into kind of what causes migration, certainly we've seen massive amounts of people who have been displaced from their homes due to war, violence, or persecution. We like to think of immigration as being resulting from kind of push factors and pull factors. So on the push side, you have people who are being pushed from their homes due to persecution, violence, and war. We see people who have low wages and lack of jobs. We see famine and just poverty are reasons why people would move. And then just limited opportunities and a lack of services. And oftentimes we find that people will relocate themselves and move from their homeland if they've been separated from their families. And that's certainly a part of Banafsha's story, and we're certainly grateful that she was able to reunify with her husband. On the pull side, we see that people desiring safety and stability and liberty are oftentimes driven to relocate to another country. The same thing for higher wages and job prospects. We see people crossing borders to access higher wage jobs. We see that internally in the country as well. We also see food availability, those same opportunities that would guarantee a ladder out of poverty, and then family reunification, better quality of life, and the availability of services. So we often think, I think in our experience of serving immigrants and refugees in particular, is on the refugee side, people are fleeing war and persecution, but everyone who's coming across the border, whether with prior authorization or without, is coming for a reason. And I think as we try to understand those reasons and empathize with those reasons, the response that we have, I think, would be changed to suit. And so we wanted to provide that background. We have the Banafsha story. We have some facts and figures about what's happening in the world and some kind of at least high-level ideas about why people migrate or immigrate. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about Catholic teaching and what it is that the Church has said about immigration. So the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, everyone knows what that is. They're all of our bosses in some level. they come together, and one of the core functions of the USCCB is to be the voice of the Catholic faithful in matters of public policy. And so when the bishops kind of come together and they do these reflections on what's happening in our world, it's always with a vision towards how can we inform the current policy debate. And so this was back in the late 2000s. The bishops of the United States and the bishops of Mexico got together, recognizing the crisis that we've seen on the southern border of the United States, coming together to say, how can we together try to advocate for a new way forward by influencing the policies of both the United States and Mexico. What the bishops do is they talk themes and principles, and they talk guidance and guidelines. They don't typically get into the nitty-gritty of do this and do that. And so we see that very strongly in this document. I would encourage anyone who's interested to jump online and just Google Strangers No Longer. It'll be the first thing that pops up. And it's not a long document, but you can really read, I think, a terrific summary of both kind of the church's reflection on Scripture, current realities. It's a little dated, but mostly it fits. And then see these themes that the bishops have offered us for consideration. So I have them listed here. We can talk about them a little bit more. But first, the first theme that the bishops propose is that persons have a right to find opportunities in their homeland. If people are familiar with the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching, we see rights and responsibilities of all people kind of play heavily in the conversation. So the bishops are saying that all persons have the right to find in their own countries those economic, political, and social opportunities necessary to live in dignity, right? So we think of those things that are required to live a dignified life: housing, healthcare, employment, education. Those are part of the Catholic human rights tradition that has been so rich since the early 1960s. I think Pope John the 23rd, I think, was the first to really delve into that. So in this context, we focus heavily on work, right? We think of work as something that, not just something that provides a just and decent wage, that is actually able to help people contribute to the formation of society. So that's the first theme that the bishops raise up. People have the right to find these opportunities in their homeland. But then second is that when people cannot find these conditions, when they can't achieve these conditions of economic, political, and social opportunities to live in dignity, they have a right to move. They have a right to move, to find employment, to find these economic, political, and social opportunities that would allow them to live in dignity. So if you can't find work in your home country, you have a right to find work elsewhere in order to survive. The church and the bishops believe that sovereign nations should provide ways to accommodate this right. So this is where we get into the complex network of immigration policy in the United States and the myriad of ways that people can immigrate into the country. The third principle or theme that the bishops raise is that sovereign nations have the right to control their borders. So we recognize the right of nations to control territories, but we reject, or they reject, forgive me, that kind of control when it's exerted for the purposes of acquiring wealth or just merely protectionism. We still, as a church, have this idea of the universal destination of all goods, that the goods of the world are here for all of us to share together. And so when a nation has the ability to provide wages and jobs and the social and economic opportunities that can really help more people thrive, there's a responsibility of that nation to open opportunities for people who can't find those realities in their home country. So the fourth theme is that refugees and asylum seekers should be afforded protection. So we recognize this crisis in the world right now of internally and externally displaced persons, 80 million people all around the globe who've had to leave their home countries or their homes because of war and persecution. And so the bishops say that those who flee wars and persecution should be protected by the global community. And this means strong protections for refugees and asylum seekers. At a minimum, the bishops say that migrants have a right to claim asylum and be able to go through a process where that claim is competently adjudicated without incarceration. And finally, the bishops say that the human dignity and human rights of undocumented migrants should be respected. So regardless of legal status, regardless of whether someone crossed a border with prior authorization or not, migrants, like all people, possess inherent human dignity. We should be very comfortable with this idea of human dignity as Catholics. Oftentimes we know that undocumented migrants are subjected to rather punitive laws and punitive measures. And we think that government policies that respect the basic human rights of the undocumented are necessary. So at the bottom of the slide, and I realize that that might be a little bit difficult for folks to read because of the color, so I apologize for that. But I thought that this was a great quip to really kind of sum things up about kind of what is the church's approach when we start to think about immigration. And so if I found, for my money, for the 2 cents that I have, this, I think, is the thing that sums up what the bishops are trying to tell us, or were trying to tell us at the time, at least. So in the current condition of the world, in which global poverty and persecution are rampant, the presumption is that persons must migrate in order to support and protect themselves, and that nations who are able to receive them should do so whenever possible. And I think that's a pretty, as direct as it gets, I think, from our bishops about how we should be considering the situations that our brothers and sisters are in all around the world. So that's a quick glimpse, a quick jaunt through Catholic social teaching. What we tried to do is give you some perspective of what's happening out there in the world, provide you the bishop's reflections on how the United States and should be responding to the needs of our sisters and brothers. And so here at Commonwealth Catholic Charities, these are all of the ways that we work very, very hard on your behalf to put those themes and principles into practice. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of the services that we provide to immigrants. And like I said in the beginning, we are one of the largest immigrant-serving organizations in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Here in the Hampton Roads area, this is really what we do. We are the immigrant-serving group primarily through our Refugee Resettlement Department, but we also have other services there as well. So we're an active refugee resettlement agency. Kristen's going to tell you all about the Refugee Resettlement Program, and especially about what we're doing in response to the Afghan crisis. We provide citizenship instruction, employment services. We provide connections to the local school systems for the children. We, of course, provide English language instruction. For people who may not have refugee status, who may be here on some other status, they're seeking family reunification or adjustment of status, they may be seeking work authorization. We have some fairly robust legal services that we provide. We're actually in the process of recruiting for a staff attorney who will help us expand those services so we can take some more complex cases like asylum cases, which we're kind of at this point a little bit under-resourced to provide. We also have what we like to think of as a robust social enterprise where we provide interpretation support to local school systems, to businesses all around the Hampton Roads region. We have a bank of how many languages? Over 30 languages in which we can provide professional quality interpretation. What we often do is we recruit from our refugee clients. We provide a credential and training and then provide people employment and support on the other side. So we really think of that as a wonderful way to really put the teaching in practice about helping people find employment. And then finally, we have, I mentioned our international foster care programs. We have several. We have unaccompanied children foster care. We have a temporary program that seeks to help reunify children with their families if they've been separated. We have a program that is a long-term unaccompanied children's foster care program in which those children will transition from our unaccompanied children's program to our refugee program once their status is worked out. And then, of course, we have an unaccompanied refugee foster care program. The refugee minor foster care program is unique in that we actually take legal custody of those children. And so those are our kids, and they're with us until they emancipate at 21. So I think at any given time, we have between 45 and 60 children who are ours, and we take very, very great care to make sure that they're well provided for. Some other things that we get involved in, especially in the temporary unaccompanied minor space, and this is where we're assisting these young kids who are coming across the border. Of course, we're providing that foster care program, but we also have some temporary shelter interventions where on a limited basis we're providing supervision and support, and then we're identifying their home families here in the United States. But so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, who's going to tell you all about our refugee programs, and hopefully from there we'll answer some fun questions.
Good evening, everybody. First, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Justice and the Peace Committee. Thank you, Father. It's really an honor to be here tonight. My name is Kristen Larcher. I'm the Director of Operations for Refugee Resettlement and Immigration Services in the Newport News office. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the process of the refugee experience and what we do as a resettlement agency. So this slide kind of gives you kind of a glimpse into how the refugee admissions program is administered in the United States. So it is a true public-private partnership. So there are 3 federal entities that work together very closely, and that's the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services. And they, through these what we call VOLOGs, or volunteer agencies, bring the work to the ground. So there are 9 of them. I don't know if we've seen these before. I think the one that you probably see on Facebook the most is the yellow one that's called IRC. Ours is, of course, there on the left, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. That is our national agency. And fun fact, 7 of these 9 are faith-based. That kind of goes and shows, you know, it's a testament to all the way back to the boat people, and you know, that it was the churches that were there welcoming these people. So yeah, so our office, CCC, we are considered an affiliate of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Where is the perimeter of our country? You can barely see it. So these little dots represent the offices that are the affiliates of those 9 VOLOGs that you just saw. So it's kind of a spattering. And it also kind of gives you a glimpse of what areas of the United States are more involved in refugee resettlement. You can see a heavy presence on the East Coast and some on the West Coast. As Jay kind of mentioned before, if you go back a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, there'd be a lot more dots. We've been losing these offices over the past several years due to declining numbers in refugee arrivals. So I talk about this as like the process that a refugee goes through before coming here, and I do this because I get a lot of questions about what does CCC do to bring refugees here. Are you involved in that? Are you involved in their processing? An affiliate like ours is not. There is a whole process that happens while refugees are still in their country. And remember the definitions, right? The refugee is different than an asylee in that the refugee gets their status before even coming. So if you look at the flow chart and you look at the arrows, the white, the gray, the mustard, the red, and the yellow, that all happens while the individual is still in their country or the country of asylum. Usually they're in a second country. So for example, referrals by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, they are the ones that give that you meet the criteria of a refugee. Then they go through pre-screenings. That's what's called a refugee support center. The Department of State funds 7 all over the world. We have offices there that are starting to do all the pre-screenings for refugees. Then they go through extensive interviews, mostly through Department of Homeland Security and USCIS. And then they go through more security checks. That can be through anti-terrorism, that can be through the FBI, that can be fingerprints, biometrics. And then right, these are all if they get through all these stages and they get to the yellow, which is, the final medical checks, they get their cultural orientation and they're ready to go, that's when an agency like ours steps in, is right around the blue, and that's called allocations. So this is done in DC. The United States Allocations Office is in DC, and they are the ones who kind of disperse the cases of refugees to those 9 vologs, back to that slide of the 9 vologs. And that's where we would get a notification, the dark blue, and we would have to verify. We verify that this person has family here, or we tell them, yes, we have the capacity and the ability to serve this family upon arrival. So once we verify and assure, they're booked for travel. They get to come, and that's really exciting. We actually go to the airport and pick them up, and then we start their services. So we say refugee a lot, but actually under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, we mean all of these categories. We mean refugees, asylees, Cuban Haitian entrants, and if we're thinking about Haitians right now, that's not the same thing. It's not the same kind of category. Special immigrant visas, visa holders, which Jay discussed before, and Malaysians and victims of trafficking. So when we actually say refugees, anyone that's coming on that kind of visa, we are able to serve as a refugee resettlement agency. So just to bring it more local, I thought that this was important to share. In Hampton Roads, and again, we can place families anywhere in Hampton Roads. Most of the families that are coming, we place in Newport News because of housing. But these are the arrival numbers that we've seen since 2016. So if you're wondering, oh, there's refugees in our community, yes, and this is how many. So back to 2016, you can see there were a lot. That was a lot for our office to handle. That was the year of the Syrian exodus, right? So ISIS had just kind of tore through Syria, and we saw several Syrian cases that year. And then from 17, 18, 19, 20, we really saw a drop off. And the arrivals number for fiscal year 21 is the lowest that it's been since 9/11. Here, locally, refugees are coming mostly from Afghanistan. And of course, probably the majority will be coming from Afghanistan in the next few months. And the second population we see is from the Congo. So what does a refugee agency do, right? So it's like, what is your staff actually doing with refugees? So we call it wraparound services. It's a whole suite of services. And these are through grants provided through the Department of State and through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And so it starts with case management. This is intensive. This is as soon as a refugee family flies into the country, we're there with boots on the ground, picking them up from the airport, making sure their house is ready, making sure all of the items are in their house, making sure that they get their benefits applied for, that their Social Security card is coming in, they're getting their initial health screening, they figure out how to pay an electrical bill, those real kind of tiny things that you would never really think that someone needs to teach you how to do. That's what we're doing. We're teaching them how to do that. So that's an intensive program that it does last about 90 days. And then after that, a family can continue to receive assistance for up to 5 years. And it's up to 5 years because that is when they're eligible for citizenship. So those services include employment, health and mental health services, youth programming, and ESL and education. And all of that we're doing in-house, we do through our staff. And I think this is also good because if you're thinking as a parish to get more involved with a new family, it's a lot, it's hands-on. These families need a lot of help at the beginning. So these are the kinds of things that, maybe a sponsorship would entail. So, right, what is going on in Afghanistan? Yes, we're receiving families as we speak that are coming from the recent evacuations. They're coming to us from Fort Lee, Fort Pickett, even some from Quantico, I think. And some are coming on that SIV status because they were already in that process, so they were able to finish out their SIV visas, which is great. You can see what, as an SIV, they are very fortunate to qualify for many public benefits. However, those that were not in any sort of process before and that were just evacuated very quickly were put onto what Jay was mentioning before, which is a humanitarian parole. And they are not going to be eligible for the same services. But we did just find out that perhaps Virginia is a state that offers Medicaid and food assistance to children and pregnant women. So again, if you're thinking of, how can we help maybe these paroles, these humanitarian paroles that are coming in, they're not going to be able to access cash assistance, right? They're not going to be able to get that hands-on help through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And so really these partnerships and these kind of anchors into the community will be vital at that point. So yes, again, going back to the needs of these numbers, and we're going to see a high amount coming into the area. Like I said, we've already received several families. There is a way you can help. You don't have to feel helpless. You can jump in. If you go to the website, which is cccofva.org, there are options to either donate, make monetary donations. Those donations will go directly to the families. They'll pay rent. They'll buy food. They'll buy children's clothing. The biggest need is probably housing, especially if we wanted to place more families in Virginia Beach, we have to locate the housing. So that would be finding people, private landlords, who are willing to rent to a refugee family. And then on our website, there's a great, makes it very easy if you want to donate things. There's a great Amazon wish list, and the wish list consists of items that are going to be put directly into the households. So items like pillows and blankets and shampoo that, again, as we know, these last waves of evacuees literally came with nothing. They had no time. We know how fast that all occurred. So these items will be very helpful to those newest arrivals.
Sorry for the back and forth. So, I mean, I think Kristen did a great job. Our biggest invitation, I think, to the parish community and so to all the faithful Catholics in the Diocese of Richmond, as well as the faithful non-Catholics in the Diocese of Richmond, is to join our team. We would not be able to do the work that we do without community support. We need anchor institutions that are able to broker key partnerships with us. We had a great conversation with the Justice and Peace Committee tonight about some local contacts at the mosques that exist here, and being able to really work with people who have the same cultural background as the people that we are welcoming into the country, so that we can really make sure that people feel not just temporarily here, but they feel at home, they feel embraced, and they feel like there's a real future for themselves and their families. So I know we want to turn it over for Q&A, question and answer. There's a million ways that people can work with us. I think one of the things that we're in the process of working out that Kristen mentioned is this whole idea of community sponsorship, where especially in these cases where people don't have access to the same things that people do when they come with a refugee visa, how can we really make sure that those folks are successful? So we did some brief math. And if a refugee family isn't able, or one of these families from Afghanistan who's come on and granted humanitarian parole, if they're not able to secure employment because work authorization hasn't been able to happen yet, after the initial cash assistance expires, we're going to have to be hustling to make sure that we can provide those basic things like rent, like food, utilities. And then I think there's a broader voluntary effort that we're going to require, which is really helping people make those community connections, learn the public transit system, make the connections with employers when they're available, help kids get enrolled in school. All of those basic things that people are going to need. And so we're going to be developing a program here in the next couple of months that will really help invite parish communities into that work, make sure that there's consistent support from Catholic Charities so that those relationships kind of form in a positive way. but also to make sure that people really do have access to the things that they need and the things that they need to thrive. There was a pop. So I think Vanna over there is going to ask for anybody who wants to ask a question. Kristen and I are going to do our best to answer these. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted us to, or is there any questions about anything that we did talk about?
Thanks, Diane. Just a couple of quick questions. How many families are you expecting at Newport News?
Come up here so that.
Oh, okay.
Just come up here. Use this.
Okay. So we said as an agency that we initially would feel comfortable accepting 40 individuals. We roughly divide that by 5. That can be eight families more or less. I think that's going to go out the window just because the information that's coming into the Department of State and coming down to us is changing every day. We will gladly take as many as we have capacity to. That is dependent on housing, yeah.
For sure. And I just wanted to check something I remember from a meeting about 15 years ago. So this is old information, but I heard from someone from the USCCB Refugee Program say that 60%, I know we got the 9 VOLAGs, but the 60% of all refugees who come into the United States come through the Catholic Church. Is that still true?
I don't know if the percentage is true, but I do know that of the 9 VOLAGs, USCCB is the 3rd largest, meaning they take the 3rd largest amount. And I think they take the highest amount of SIVs of the network. But I know if you're talking about size, which is volume, which is per capita, USCCB is the 3rd.
So I have a few questions, if you don't mind. Can you talk a little bit more about persecution? What are people actually being persecuted for that makes them want to leave their country?
You mean the situation in Afghanistan or just in general?
No, just in general.
Sure.
I mean, I can understand
Sure.
war and I can understand violence, but I don't know what the persecution is that they're trying to get away from.
Sure. So the definition to be determined as to gain status as a refugee, determined by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee, you do have to meet those basic standards, and that is a well-founded fear of persecution due to a couple things, and it's usually race, religion, ethnicity, or political affiliation, or religion, or affiliation to some type of social group.
So these are people who live in a country and they're feeling that is happening to them in their country.
Not just a feeling, they can prove it, and it's proven, I think, along that, the flow chart. That flow chart really weeds out any chance of it not being true.
Okay.
Please.
I think if you remember what happened in Syria, there was a good number of Christians who were persecuted. And actually ISIS were following them and even persecuted directly. And that's why some of them had to flee to go to another country.
Now, I can understand that, but when I ask the question, it probably has more to do with the southern border issue, where, again, is persecution something that is coming from that area as well? And it may be.
So in that case, I mean, and I think Kristen mentioned, so within the refugee process, people go through that status, receive that status prior to coming to the country, right? So that's something that's granted. Typically, someone's fled their home country into a second country, they've claimed asylum, that claim is adjudicated, and then they're referred for resettlement. So it's the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. I'd like to be that person someday. But so in the case for people coming across the southern border without prior authorization and claiming asylum, that claim gets adjudicated here in the United States. So the same maybe not the same exact process that's happening on the refugee side is happening through a competent court here in the United States. So the ability to claim asylum, right, is you have the ability to claim it. You're fleeing your home country. You're coming to the United States, or you're coming to Canada, or you're coming to another country. You claim asylum. That's governed by international law, and then the laws of the local country have to take their course. So that is a legal process that someone has the right to claim. So that persecution that someone's claiming when they come to the United States, that gets adjudicated and evaluated in the same way, just against the standards, as it gets evaluated in a third country. So there are legal processes that govern all of this. It is not unlawful to cross the southern border and claim asylum.
We hear a lot about there's strength in our differences, and I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, I've always thought the United States was a melting pot. So when you bring people in from various countries, I don't think we necessarily want them starting their own little country here. We want them to kind of blend in and become part of the melting pot of being an American. Do you address that at all with the people who you get to deal with?
Do you want to talk about cultural orientation and all that?
Sure, yeah, about standard integration. Yeah. Right, so you're referring to like ethnic enclaves, right? That's what we want to avoid.
It could be, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right, I think the design of the United States Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP, that's its primary goal, is successful integration. And so there are leading indicators for that, and that is, making sure that they are moving towards being active civic, participants in daily life. And so what we do at the office, we definitely try to do this at the beginning, is to teach them through cultural orientations, many different topics: U.S. law, housing, safe housing, health and hygiene, how to navigate around your neighborhood, how to become connected with local, anything in your community that would help you. We do try to teach them that, and as the years go on, we do try to encourage them to do those things on their own, right? So that they're not just coming back to our office, or that they're just not relying on some other entity to do these things for them. So that is in the design of the first 90-day program, and then through the rest, as you see, for 5 years, the office is there offering those assistances. So one of the leading indicators for successful integration is employment, right? Is getting a job, and I think most refugees are employed by the 90th day that they're in the United States.
I have one more question. You say you're looking for a staff attorney. Is that true?
That is true.
Is that local? Is that for a local attorney? I mean, you're looking for that attorney to work in the Hampton Roads area.
So Hampton Roads, out of Newport News and Norfolk.
Okay, because we have a young attorney here in Church of the Ascension who is out of work right now.
Oh.
And has 3 or 4 children, and it would be nice for him to have an opportunity to consider that. So if you'll give me some information before we leave, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll give you my card.
Okay.
If I could return to one, and I appreciate the melting pot image. I've never liked it. I'm Irish and I'm Greek. That's my heritage, right? I grew up going to church, in the Catholic Church and in the Greek Orthodox Church. I love Easter. We're all Easter people. Alleluia is our song. Greek Easter is so cool. It's the greatest thing, right? It's awesome. If the melting pot, in my experience, were true, then we would that all those differences and the unique parts of our heritage would melt away, and we would form this one kind of, glob of American kind of culture. That's not our experience, right? We all have family traditions that in some way relate to our heritage and our ethnicity, and that's something that we treasure and value. It's one thing to say that on St. Patrick's Day everybody's Irish, right? But it's another thing to go through, South Philadelphia, and every other block, there's the Irish church, there's the German church, and so those are firm and strong parts of our heritage that should be celebrated as Americans. So I often like to think, and I spent some time in South Africa when I was at Villanova. And the image that they like to think of there is one of, a number of tributaries flowing into the same river. And so we see all of the beauty of the ethnicities and the heritage that have made us who we are as American people coming together to move us in one direction. And that's really what I like to think of cultural orientation and integration. It's not about blending and making a uniform kind of culture. It's about celebrating the richness that comes from various cultures and various entities. And I know that as a Greek, Irish American, I cherish both of those parts of my ethnicity and my heritage. And I think, people who are coming here certainly need to integrate. We need to make sure that they're a part of our neighborhoods, they're a part of our communities, but should be celebrated for being Afghan.
Hi, John.
I wanted to say one more thing too. Sorry, Ruth. I wanted to say one more thing about this theory of integration. What's that?
I want to say it first.
Oh, sure.
Good. My dad came from Italy.
Oh.
And his family was known as the Cornetas from Bronx. And then there was the Maria Scarsdale, because everybody in the village from Italy came and settled in the same general area of New York. And they survived by knowing each other. I'm first generation, and I'm the melting pot, if you will, of that Italian culture. And I love Italian Easter, and I love my mother's Scotch-Irish background. So melting pots, I'm not so sure, are truly fluid that become all gray, but made up of many sprinkles of different colors. Thank you. That's okay, John. I forgive you, honey.
So I think one aspect of integration is I just remembered this. My dissertation in graduate school was on refugee integration, and two of the lead researchers for that are Adger and Strange. If you just Google Scholar their names, and you can see all the articles come up. And one of their main theories was that integration is a two-way street. It's a two-way street, meaning not just the refugees or immigrants coming in have to make effort, the host community has to make efforts too. So to answer your initial question about what are we doing to help with integration, we also come out and do things like this. Like, we come and we talk to anyone who will listen about what we're doing, what the needs are, maybe where gaps in services are. How can someone integrate if you go to a private clinic and they don't have language services, right? So it's both. It's a two-way street. Those coming in have to make the effort, and the host community also has to be aware of what is needed for them to fully thrive.
If I could change the topic here just a little bit, and we got people that need some help that are coming in. And I've listened to what you had to say, and our parish is having some discussions about how we can best help you and these people. And I'm hearing two general themes of how we can help, and I'd like you to comment on how we can help best. One way we've been talking about is take a whole family and have the parish jump on it and try to help. That's a big task, which I've just heard. Another way is to go after all the things that various families need and go after towels, food, furniture. Would you give us some guidance based on what you see on a parish of 1,300 families? What would be the best strategy to go after? A family at a time, or go after bits and pieces. Do you see what I'm saying? That might be the best way to help your office as we try to help these people, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think as we mentioned, we can serve Hampton Roads as a resettlement agency. That means we can cover 50 miles, actually up to 100 miles. We tend to stay in Newport News just because that's where our office is and that's where we have most of our housing connections. But I think we need to do what's best for refugees to be able to best integrate. And big cities tend to offer great things for newcomers, right? Endless community support, fantastic parishes, good school systems. I know right now Oceanfront is hiring 150 jobs. So I think it just would behoove us as a resettlement agency to have more newcomers here in Virginia Beach. So I think it would be great to have parishes, other groups, to start thinking if they have the ability and the will and the drive. As you saw in the thing, it's not just a few weeks you're hanging out with a family. It's a lot of work. So I think if that's something, I think that would be the better of the two. We will always take donations from an Amazon wish list, but I think the need is to start looking at what other cities have to offer so that these families can truly benefit from what's in a great city, large city like Virginia Beach. Yes?
And what we're doing, so I think that can look like a lot of things, I think. And I think what we'd be interested in doing as an organization is working with Ascension, if it has a desire to help families, a family, multiple families, then we can work with Ascension to figure out the best way to make that happen. We're going to have the folks that need the help and the support. We're going to have some capacity because of the tremendous generosity that we've seen over the last, just 4 or 5 weeks of the people of Virginia and of the United States who have just, showered us with gifts, material, financial, spiritual, across the board. So whatever we can do to engage Ascension in a conversation, there's some work that we have to do on the back end to develop what I mentioned is this community sponsorship model. Because what we want to make sure that what we don't do is we just kind of say, here's a family, and kind of leave you to your own devices. What we'd really like to make sure that we can do is help build a paradigm where you can provide material and material support that families need, but that doesn't ever outweigh an individual family's ability to make decisions for themselves. So we want to be able to play that kind of backbone support for you, and so we're going to be working out some of the logistics on the back end of how that works. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be in regular communication about how we can make those connections. The reality with some of the parolees, the people who have been granted humanitarian parole, it seems like every week we're being told they're coming next week. And it's just being pushed out a little bit. So we've had a number of issues. You've read about the measles outbreak. You've read about there's been some changes in the way that work authorization requests are happening. So there's kind of this holding pattern that's happening on the bases. But like Kristen was just telling me before, is we have a family who just arrived at the Portsmouth Naval Base that we're working to help right now. So there's kind of that hurry up and wait sort of situation that we're in. And we will need the community support, so being able to have people, whether it's the Justice and Peace Committee, who can then engage the entire parish, to have a conversation and a dialogue with about what are the best ways that we can support these families when they're here. That's what we want to do. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
You talk about the Amazon wish list. Does that mean everything has to be brand new, or do you take donations?
So, because of COVID still, and because of basic hygiene issues that we've had in the past, we are asking that items that are going directly into households, like the towels, sheets, clothes, be new at this point. furniture, donations of couches, coffee tables, end tables, those can be used.
That was very, very informative. Thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. But don't go away, because we might need you. So the last part of all of our forums is, all right, what can we do with this? So one thing, we've been talking around the fact that we are interested at least in supporting a family. So I have a clipboard that Ruth has put together that we're going to circulate. And if you're interested in learning more about this process, there's no commitment that you're going to sign up tonight. If you put your name on this piece of paper, it doesn't mean we're going to call you tomorrow and say, will you give us a couch? Or will you buy, sheets up from Amazon? But Ruth will take that, and it will have a place to start. And of course, if this comes to fruition, the whole parish will be invited to be part of that. So that's our first thought. But our other thought is, do any of you have any ideas or anything that you two could add that we as a parish, beyond this huge task, could do? So people out, if you have any ideas, now's the time to share them, and we'll kind of record them. So any thoughts or ideas on your end? Nobody? Okay. Any thoughts on your end? Things maybe you've seen in the past that other groups have done that maybe aren't as extensive as adopting someone.
Kristen's coming up with her list. Two things that we've been, just routinely asking for. If you own real estate, multifamily properties, single-family homes that you rent, and would be willing to have a conversation with us about renting to a refugee family, that is an urgent and huge need. Whether you have those properties, friends or family members of yours have those properties, or individuals in the parish. We need new relationships with landlords all across the Hampton Roads region to make sure that we can house these families. That's the first thing that we need to do when they arrive. The second thing is we need employers. We need people who are willing to take advantage of this opportunity to employ an entirely new workforce. And so often, folks who risk their own lives to serve alongside of our servicemen and women. So if you own a business, if you know someone who owns a business, if you work in HR at a company, we would love to have conversations with you about building a pipeline of new Americans who can provide valuable service to your country, to your companies. What else? Sorry. Should have kept going. Sorry.
A lot of food for thought, a lot of information, one thing I think we all need to do is just remember to pray for all these people. I mean, think about if you were in that situation, and I think all of us, again, who are immigrants somewhere in our past, who have immigrants, we've thought about those people, about what it took for them to come. And so now there are people still in that situation, and they want to come so that 2 or 3 generations from now, their kids and their grandkids can be standing here. And that's what we want, that's that integration. So without any other comments, Father, could you just maybe close us in a prayer? And then again, thank you very much. And you'll hang around for questions afterwards? Okay, thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank our facilitators for today, and let us give them applauses for us. Dear friends, what we have been discussing today is something important in our day-to-day life. The refugees are people in need. They need our prayers. They need our protection. They need our presence. to support them. Today I was getting information from Tanzania. Even in Tanzania, we have a lot of refugees. They are from Republic of Congo. They are from Burundi. And some, they have been for a long time, more than 40 years. And even some of them have been integrated and become citizens in Tanzania. And we have even priests from Tanzania, from our Archdiocese of Tabora, who have come from those families from Burundi. What we have come to learn, the refugees, when they come into our lives, they come also with the gifts God has given them. Their presence can make a difference in our lives. I remember when I was in Tanzania, the refugees, when they came, we saw them at the beginning as people in need, but after some time, they started engaging themselves, and they started even cultivating, and they were very good farmers. And some have been joined even for different activities and even the government offices. So today, dear friends, let us continue to ponder, to pray, so that we can continue to open up ourselves to pray for those people who are struggling, but also to open up ourselves to continue to show our love and our commitments. Ascension always will continue to be Ascension for people in need, and Ascension to be also ready to proclaim the good news. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this night, and we thank you for each and everything what you have been discussing, so that we may continue always to ponder in our journey of life. Give us courage to continue to work together as a family of God with love and peace. And we ask thee through Christ our Lord. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Thank you so much.
I'm going to put this clipboard out on the back where all the other papers are. So if you're interested, don't leave without signing it. Again, you're not signing up for anything or just saying, hey, I'm interested and want to do more. And Jay and Kristen will be around.